Shalom Lekulam. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second webinar in our series with the JISS, the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. It's my great pleasure to welcome you. For those of you listening after the event on YouTube or on our new podcast, then enjoy as well. And please do join us for the live conversations in the future, because you'll be able to put questions to our guests. Our guest today in this second webinar, as I said, in this new series, is Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman, who is the Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Dr. Lerman was Deputy Director for Foreign Policy and International Affairs at the National Security Council in the Israeli Prime Minister's office. He's held senior posts in IDF military intelligence for over 20 years. He also served for 8 years as director of the Israel and Middle East office of the American Jewish Committee. He teaches in the Middle East Studies program at Shalem College in Jerusalem and in postgraduate programs at Tel Aviv University and the National Defense College. He has a PhD from the London School of Economics, and you'll hear he has a wonderful British accent when he speaks, and a mid-career MPA from Harvard. Less said about that, the better. But I welcome, it's always a pleasure to welcome Eran Lerman and to learn from him. And I must say, Eran, when we put this together, and it was clear to me that we needed to have a webinar talking about Gaza and what the Trump plan meant, I didn't know, of course, that when we would be, the date we would be having it would be just after some extremely significant developments in that area. Someone has said that there's no sound. Is that the case for everyone, or just for the gentleman who has mentioned it, Yehuda? Maybe someone can write in the chat and tell me if they can hear us.
I can hear you loud and clear.
I think it's okay. Oh, okay. I think, Yehuda, you maybe just turn on your speaker. It could be as simple as that. All right. Thank you, everyone, for confirming. All right. I want to start, Dr. Eran Lerman, I want to start with a general question. You know, we've had the war ended more or less with the Trump plan, the Trump peace plan, much lauded by many people, criticized by some. But certainly it meant it led to the end of hostilities. It led to the return home of all of the living hostages, almost all of the deceased hostages. We're still waiting for one, of course. But it was, a monumental moment in the very eventful and many respects tragic events of the past 2 or 3 years. But it's not without its controversies and its complications, and I think things have become more, in many respects, more controversial in recent days. So maybe you could just tell us, from your perspective, where we stand. How do you assess where things are with Gaza now, and maybe some thoughts about where it's going? And I'll ask some follow-up questions, and then there'll be time for our audience to write some questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen for the last 20 minutes or so.
Great, Paul. One minor biographical correction. I'm now involved with the strategy, diplomacy, and security program at Shalem College, which is a new venture trying to train the young Israelis for future strategic leadership. We have discussions with these at the level of analysis. Now, before I launch my points on the Gaza situation, allow me to pay respects to the memory of a colleague and friend who passed away 2 days ago. We brought him to burial here in Modi'in yesterday, who was actually the Ministry of Foreign Affairs representative at the CMCC, at the Civil Military Coordination Center in Kiryat Gat, which I will speak about. Ambassador Eitan Naeh formerly our ambassador in Bahrain, in Azerbaijan, and other places, and one of the most talented and, by the way, also, let's say, spirited and humorous people I worked with over the years, and it's a grievous loss. And I thought I should mention this under these circumstances, specifically because he also was involved in this very much this project of trying to generate a basis, an operational basis for future solutions in Gaza. I would also say that I'm not entirely impartial here. Ideas very close to what ended up being the Trump plan were formulated by myself and another colleague at JISS, Robert Silverman, and by a group of eminent Americans including, by the way, General Keith Dayton, who was the original liaison to the Palestinian security forces in his day. And we more or less suggested a structure not very different from the one that is now beginning to emerge. But we also have to bear in mind that amidst all this, the dynamic force, the most influential element in all of this is President Trump himself and people close to him. Specifically, I would mention, above all, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to some extent. Shara Bahbah, whom I also know, 30 years back when we were both involved in the arms control regional security talks. At the time, he was working for the Palestinians. Now he is Trump's American-Palestinian voice. But what we ended up with is an extremely complex and in many ways impressive piece of architecture, of structural arrangements that are supposed to be the basis from which solutions for the problem of Gaza would flow. And these include, I've already mentioned the CMCC, the coordination center, the civil military coordination center, an unprecedented event, really, in our history here in Israel. Nothing even remotely similar to this has ever happened here. And it's an American mission working very closely with the IDF. There are three floors in the building. One is American, one is joint, and one is Israeli. And in the joint area, you also find Arab officers working shoulder to shoulder with Israel and the United States, people from the Gulf, Egyptians, Jordanians, sitting in Israel as a guest of Israel here in coordinating an effort to bring immediate humanitarian solutions to Gaza and think in an organized way about phase 2 and its implementation. The whole thing is totally unprecedented. The appointment of a key person to coordinate all of this, somebody whom I very much expected to emerge as a central player, namely Nikolai Mladinov, a former senior Bulgarian political figure, Minister of Defense, Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also previously the UN envoy to the Palestinian areas, and a man that Israel worked quite closely and quite effectively with, who was basically friendly to the Israeli point of view, very critical in his day, and I remember this quite vividly, of the Palestinian Authority and its catastrophic corruption and dysfunction, and the manner in which they abused the people of Gaza. And so a man with a certain sensitivity and understanding of the complexity of the challenge. And then you have the appointment of the government of technocrats, which is supposed to take over the daily governance of Gaza from Hamas, from the Hamas civil administration. These are people who, including Mr. Shah, who've all been vetted by the Shin Bet. This is not something that Israel feels really uncomfortable with. And then you have on top of all of this architecture, you have this invention called the Board of Peace. And here things are beginning to get, as Alice said as she was tasting things, curiouser and curiouser. Because frankly, this is beginning to metastasize or mushroom into a would-be replacement for the United Nations Security Council. And various famous Democrats have been invited, like Lukashenko of Belarus. And we have reasons to scratch our head right now. Of course, any framework which puts Hakan Fidan, not only a very close ally of Erdogan, but somebody with whom we've had very problematic dealings in his previous capacity as head of Turkish intelligence. If he is to have a key position, then you shouldn't be surprised that I'm scratching my head. Now, having said all this, another element of the architecture is, and the key one, what would and should be the main pillar of this entire broad tent, is still missing, namely the ISF, the International Stabilization Force. We would have used a different name, but it doesn't matter. We're talking about much the same thing. And I hope you're still hearing me. Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The conference last in December of the would-be contributors that CENTCOM, American Central Command, organized in Qatar, essentially produced no buy-in from anyone as yet. There's talk of Indonesians and Azeris and Italians, and I haven't seen a single brigade already assigned to the ISF, which raises very serious questions. So we are not yet there with anything coherent that would resolve the three basic problems. I think let's concentrate on three basic problems remaining. We have made major progress in certain things. Bye, Hamudim. I'm saying goodbye to my grandchildren. The military situation has changed very dramatically in favor of Israel. Hamas has been dramatically degraded. Its capability of launching against Israel has come down to practically next to zero. The IDF is firmly in control of 53% of the Gaza Strip. There is no contiguity between what Hamas now still controls, more or less, and any of the border settlement villages, border areas, Otef Aza, as we call it, the Gaza envelope. And so things have changed, but we still have three fundamental questions which have not been resolved. One is quite clearly the issue of Hamas weapons, the need for Hamas to disarm. It's very much there in the text of both Trump's positions and UN Security Council Resolution 2803, which is firmly based on the Trump plan as it was formulated. it speaks very clearly about the need for Hamas to disarm, and Trump today again reasserted the need for them to make a decision swiftly. He talks about days, and then it could be, of course, it could take longer, and then weeks until it actually is done, and unless it happens again, all hell will break loose. They will be destroyed. We know the Trump language, but we don't know the path to implementation. The ISF is not there to impose it, and even if it is created, I cannot truly imagine a situation in which they move in and disarm Hamas by force. The second problem, and one that runs even deeper, is de-radicalization as a grand strategy, as an aspect of what must happen, what needs to happen in Gaza. Because the naive American belief that ultimately all Gazans and all people around the world want what we want, a better life, a longer car, a future for our children, good vacations, whatever, the imagery of material well-being as the end goal of people around the world doesn't necessarily apply to what Hamas believes and what Hamas has been inculcating in the minds of young people in Gaza now for the better part of a generation. They believe that there are higher values, and these involve the eradication of this Zionist upstart state that took away their land from them as they see it, and that's a higher goal and better to achieve in life or death than a better life on this earth. And so, without a systematic effort of de-radicalization, of changing the education system, the media system, the language of the sermons in the mosques, and all that flows from it, we will find ourselves once again facing the same kind of problem, maybe not the same kind of capabilities that we faced on the 7th of October, which is still very difficult for all of us to fathom. You know, you still ask Israelis sometimes, what's the date? And they will tell you the 130 of October 23. We are still there. We are still under the impact of the trauma. And for this to be allowed to re-emerge is an extremely dangerous frame of mind. And without a de-radicalization program, that is a major challenge. And the third element I already mentioned is the role of Turkey and Qatar in the Board of Peace, and they seek also to be integrated both into the ISF and into the reconstruction, civilian reconstruction effort. And for us, basically, this is an extreme challenge because Erdogan, in his own way, and the Qataris, in hand with him, in their own way, which involves huge amounts of money, have been the co-sponsors of Muslim Brotherhood establishments across the region, and Hamas as being one of them. So these three elements, the disarmament, de-radicalization, and seeking to bar the Turks and Qataris from direct involvement in Gaza are all challenges that we still face. And under these circumstances, very quickly, before I open this to questions, let me say that I can see, and I've suggested this also in writing in JISS, I basically see four different scenarios, or let's say categories of scenarios emerging. One is that ultimately we'll end up with the present situation, including long-term partition of Gaza Strip into Hamas-controlled areas, and Israeli controlled areas or internationally controlled areas as a permanent reality um, may very well emerge as an option. Several variations on the central theme of basically perpetuating the present situation as it emerged after the Israeli conquest of more than half of the Strip. A second possibility, or set of possibilities, involves a decision. Trump at least sounded as if this is something that he may accept. I would be very careful with that assumption. For an all-out Israeli assault to eradicate Hamas from the entire Gaza Strip. Um, it sounds frightening, and it should be, because it is a major challenge, particularly involving warfare in extremely densely populated areas. But at the end of the day, I think the IDF being where it is now, versus Hamas being essentially a ragtag force of very young recruits, because all of the best commanders and junior commanders have been eliminated in warfare until now. It's going to be, I believe, it's not without casualties, painful casualties, but it can be done. And it can be done probably quicker than people realize. But it's still a major decision, not only because of the casualties involved in the operation, but also because of the responsibilities that would fall on Israeli soldiers, on the shoulders, on the IDF shoulders, in a situation of full conquest. So that's another question, another set of options. A third, and I think that this is where the, let's say, real estate mind of the key American players, remember they all come from real estate, Trump and Witkoff and Jared Kushner. I think their mind is to create on the Israeli side of the yellow line, of the line of partition in Gaza, which is now essentially depopulated. There are a few thousand Gazans in that area, no more. Many of them belonging to the anti-Hamas elements or Hamulas, as they say, clans in Gaza.
And this
But
is
the
and
idea
this is
is to
about
create
and this is about 50. This is about 53% of Gaza at this point.
of the Gaza Strip as it was. And the idea is to build in that area under Israeli supervision and with international investment and so on, an infrastructure for life, for a better life, which will be so impressive and so different from what the Gazans have now that it would gradually draw over the line in a controlled manner significant segments of the population, and Hamas would lose its base of control and would be forced to collapse by this kind of, I would say, a sucking out of the Gazans over into rebuilt areas that the Gaza project will make possible. The problem is that Hamas are likely to shoot anyone who tries to leave and go over to the Israeli side. They're likely to shoot them in the back. Quite simply, the way the Russians used to do, or the East Germans used to do, with people who tried to go over the fence. So it's a fascinating project. It is feasible in terms of creating something in the Israeli control part of Gaza, but whether it will actually achieve the ultimate goal of pulling the rug from under Hamas's feet, I'm doubtful. I have my questions. And finally, I would say there's also an option for Israel, in order not to antagonize President Trump, who has written, as you may have seen, to the Norwegian, telling that, I ended 8 wars and you didn't even give me the prize. So I wouldn't, use the more polite equivalent of something blunter. Basically, we don't want to anger him by proving that he was wrong and that this is not peace in the Middle East for the first time after 3,000 years. But having said so, we can perhaps take a bite of Hamas every time, go in, take some more territory, reconstruct it, help the people there have a better life, and then find another reason, and Hamas are sure to give us some reasons to take another bite and another bite until the process is completed. It's a variation on conquest, but it's a slow and methodical and piecemeal version, and that would enable us to deliver the areas that we take in a gradual manner, in a modular manner to basically hand them over to the ISF and all these fine institutional structures that I've mentioned. So these are essentially the four options. And I half jokingly told Paul before we started that at this point I'm going to declare myself, in a sense, somewhat Muslim, in the sense that, in one sense only, namely, that it is the firm position of Muslims, wherever they are, that the last of the prophets was Muhammad, Khatem al-Anbiya, the last of the prophets. Anyone who believes in the prophet after Muhammad, including believers of Elijah, Muhammad, and in the nation of Islam, who styled himself a prophet. Anyone who believes there was a prophet after Muhammad is not really a Muslim. Is not considered a Muslim, technically speaking. And I am not going to offer you any prophecies. I'm not a prophet, and it is and because of the factor of Trump's unpredictability, because Hamas is half broken but not sufficiently broken, because Israel has to make very difficult decisions in an election year with all the political tensions involved. I'm not going to try even to predict which of the four options I outlined here is going to be implemented. I can say that I think the fourth has its, in the balance, has its merits, but essentially what Hamas will induce us to do in the next few weeks and months is extremely difficult to predict. I would say this as a final point. We did achieve a transformative effect in Gaza, brutally transformative, but transformative. Ultimately, I think Hamas cannot hold. Militarily, they are far inferior to what Israel can bring to bear. And this is the equation which ultimately will prevail. But when and how exactly, I think it's too early to tell.
Okay, thank you for that very comprehensive assessment. I hope, by the way, any journalists on the Zoom, I hope none of them stopped listening after you declared yourself a Muslim and listened to your important clarification as to what you meant. So there's no story. We don't see any stories in that.
I meant it in a very specific
Eran Lerman
sense.
has converted to Islam.
No prophets.
No, okay, no profit. That's an important qualification. So there's many things I could pick up on, but I don't want to take up all the time because we have questions already coming in from our audience. You mentioned, of course, that the ISF, which the International Stabilization Force, which has not come into being yet. And as I recall, one of the reasons why such a thing was necessary was because it was made very clear by Israel from the get-go that if the IDF wasn't going to be responsible for security, then obviously Hamas wouldn't be, but also we didn't want the Palestinian Authority to be either. So the ISF was some kind of alternative to that. But I read today, and you can tell me if this is accurate, that there is some kind of Palestinian force being trained by the Egyptians that would report to I guess to Ali Shaf's technocratic
Yeah,
body.
we're talking about the
It's
police
a police
functions.
Palestinian police force. So, in your view, would that Palestinian police force, you think, be given the task of disarming Hamas? Is that remotely feasible?
Frankly, no, I don't think that this is remotely possible for the kind of formations that Egyptians are talking about.
Hmm.
What they will do is enable armed Hamas men who now are in the streets enforcing um, public order of sorts, um, to disappear into the shadows and prepare themselves for other missions, so to speak. There will not be Hamas men in Hamas uniforms with guns uh, catching petty thieves or whatever. That will fall, or putting an end to public disorders. That would be the duty of these police elements, but they're not, by the numbers and scope and character of this mission, they are not going to be the element that can disarm an organization like Hamas. For this, you need either the IDF or a very significant ISF with combat-worthy brigades from various countries coming in, and that's not there yet.
Yeah. Okay. I had a question also about the what you mentioned right at the beginning, or you mentioned at the beginning and then went back to it, which is the problematic inclusion of Qatar and Turkey in this whole structure, and it's led to a rare sort of public daylight between Washington and Jerusalem, right? With Netanyahu coming out quite openly in criticism of it, and I think speaking to Secretary of State Marco Rubio about it. But
No, he assigned this mission to Gideon Saar.
to get on
You
Saar,
know,
right?
when you get it's very comfortable when you're going to fail to send somebody else to bat his head on this. But
Right. So okay. So that's my question really, or I guess my question is, you say to fail, and I guess it is going to fail because we're not going to change. We Israel are not going to
yeah,
change Trump's mind on this, not least because whether we like it or not, he has very good personal relations with Erdogan and the Emir of Qatar. So
I'll take it a step further. The American ambassador in Ankara, Tom Barrack, is a very close. It sounds occasionally as if it's basically become, as the British Foreign Service used to say, we send somebody to this and that capital, and he married the natives.
right,
And
gone
and,
native.
uh, and 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 certainly we have a case here of an American ambassador who seems to be basically reflecting Erdogan's view,
Hmm,
but he also is a close personal friend and ally of President Trump.
hmm,
And you can see the footprints of his influence in various texts and actions. We see this now in Syria in a very worrisome way,
yeah,
with what's happening to the Kurds.
yeah,
And so also on the question of Qatar and Turkey, there are influences very close to the president in this respect. Nevertheless, Israel has very little choice but to insist that even if Hakan Fidan sits on the board of peace, no Turkish military
hmm,
or major civilian components would enter Gaza under the present circumstances, if only for the very reasonable concern that should they come into friction with the IDF, the consequences could be catastrophic. Imagine a NATO member with its troops fighting the IDF on a border skirmish. So, or an attempt to stop Israeli troops from arresting a terrorist in Gaza Strip. So the very idea of having them there is extremely problematic.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, see, I guess my question, you sort of answered my question, which was going to be also how much, how much can Israel limit the negative effects of this? Can Israel, for example, put its foot down and prevent, as you say, Qatari and Turkish boots on the ground in Gaza? And I think you're saying
Yeah.
yes, and that's important. Um,
Let's
and
remember that the language, the specific language of
mm,
your Security Council Resolution 2803 actually requires every ISF deployment to be coordinated with Israel and Egypt.
mm,
And almost by definition, they have to be because they have to come in from either Egypt or Israel.
right,
And so we have some leverage and we have some tools, and this requirement of coordination is a very serious one.
right,
And I should hope that at least in terms of physical presence on the ground, our argument against it, which is focused on the possibility of friction, very dangerous friction. Our argument may somehow resonate even with Trump for all his friendship with Erdogan.
mm,
So the game is still afoot, as Sherlock used to say, but we have even some formal grounds, let's
right,
say, based on the UN resolution to veto
mm,
Turkish and Qatari military participation and major construction teams going there.
right. Okay, final question from me before I go to questions from our audience. It's somewhat tangential to the main point, but I think it's interesting. A number of countries have been invited by Trump. Many countries, it seems, have been invited by Trump to this board of peace, and many have said no or given a kind of holding answer or said we can't give a reply yet because we need some sort of parliamentary decision. But among the countries that have said yes include the Saudis, the UAE, Morocco, Indonesia, Pakistan. So you have
Essentially, the group of eight that met with
right.
Trump
The eight was right.
before.
So you have right. So there you have you have obviously Morocco and UAE Abraham Accords countries, and then you have a bunch of other Arab and Muslim countries that were would be hope would Israel would have hoped might be in the next sort of circle of expansion of the Abraham
The
Accords
Abraham Accords.
if that were to happen. And I guess my question is, if do you think that by that this process, at least if it goes somewhat positively, could reignite that whole Abraham Accord process, which seems to be a little bit
Off
comatose
track right
at the
now.
moment, yeah, for various reasons. I mean, for obvious reasons.
Frankly, I am having I'm increasingly doubtful
Mm,
about where the Saudi cat is going to jump on this.
mm,
We had some high hopes. To some extent, I think that it frightened Sinwar sufficiently to launch the 7th of
yeah,
October because of his sense that Israel and Saudi Arabia are coming together. And if that happens, that's the end of the Palestinian cause as we know it. Uh, the sad truth is that the Saudis have been affected. They have been affected by the imagery. They've been affected by the spirit that in other parts of the Arab world and even in places in Europe and so on. And they've drifted seriously away from the path of normalization with Israel. Not entirely. There are still Israeli businessmen doing things, interesting things in Saudi Arabia, but at the strategic level, we are drifting away from that option, with all that this implies.
mm. Okay. All right, let's go to questions that have already been put from audience members, and please keep them coming. We have about 20 minutes. a question from Barbara Diamond, who she puts the very interesting idea that if the Iranian regime were toppled, then could that not solve a lot of the problems that we're talking about, in the sense that, as she writes, it would block the flow of funds to the Muslim Brotherhood, that Qatar would be weakened. She suggests Turkey might be weakened. Might it be a solution, or a part solution, to deal with the Iranian regime first, and then that could actually help us with Gaza?
Well, to be frank, it would be of immense help overall if the Iranian regime is replaced by a very different proposition vis-à-vis Israel, vis-à-vis the West. But it will not diminish Turkey. It will make it stronger, more aggressive. The Iranians don't like the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood don't much like them. Let's not get confused. The Iranians supported the butchery that Assad systematically supported the butchery of Bashar al-Assad in Syria against the Muslim Brotherhood, against the Sunni Islamist radicals for many years. Hezbollah, as an Iranian proxy, has fought against the Sunni radicals. So there's no love lost there. They are not sponsors of the Muslim Brotherhood. If there is a sponsor, it is Erdogan and not the Iranians. The Iranians are supporting specific elements, of course, wherever they can find Shia, like Hezbollah and the Houthis, and some underground elements in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. But they are also willing to find Sunni proxies like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which would be entirely controlled by them. But in the case of Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood elements generally, what the Iranians did was find a way to work with them, but they never worked for them, and these organizations never became Iranian proxies. And so, unfortunately, of course, let's put it very clearly, it will be a fantastic thing, a wonderful thing, if the Iranian people get rid of the mullahs and all that the mullahs have done to them over the years. But Hamas is not too much in that equation. It is increasingly drifting into the Turkish orbit, with all the implications. And of course, a weak Iran means a stronger Turkey with stronger ambitions.
Qatar, because Qatar is
is also essentially an ally and partner of Erdogan, not of Iran. They have been, let's say, ambivalent about the Iranians. They have business dealings with the Iranians. They try to fend off American attempts to attack Iran, if only because they feared, and indeed this is what happened, that the Iranians would retaliate by an attack on the Al Udeid base, the largest American base, air base, in the region, which is in the Qataris are giving it to the Americans free of charge. So they have the Turks and the Qataris are very much in the same category, supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood elements everywhere. They supported them in Egypt 12 years ago. They supported them in Libya against Haftar's forces, and they are supporting them in the Gaza Strip, regardless of what happens to Iran.
Okay. Thank you. A question from Shmuel Yerushalmi, who asks whether you think that he terms it Trump's intervention in our conflict, or the involvement of the United States in this conflict, whether ultimately that's actually, he's suggesting, is actually a bad thing, because it's better that we deal with these things. He's suggesting it's better that we deal with these things internally, and then having the US involved means that we have, for example, this kind of stuff imposed on us by the American president, and that maybe that's just damaging to, in his words, our national interests and national independence.
Well, frankly, I cannot dismiss the argument or the sense or the feeling, if you wish, that we've lost some of our capability for sovereign decisions. Dealing with Trump in his unpredictable way, but also in the manner in which he has turned the executive branch of government in Washington into a very aggressive, dominant player, and Congress, where we used to have sufficient leverage to, let's say, modify or even reverse problematic policies, that's hardly relevant to the manner in which Trump does business. So yes, we are losing some of our autonomy to make decisions. I don't think it's a healthy thing. I agree. Uh, I believe that this is one of the reasons, one of the long-term considerations, which led Prime Minister Netanyahu to suggest, under present circumstances, that we should seek essentially to become non-dependent. Let's put it, not necessarily independent, but non-dependent on American largesse from the American taxpayer, basically financing our acquisitions in the United States. We are now in a position to be able to do this kind of thing for ourselves, either producing in Israel or buying off the shelf from the Americans without asking this to be financed by the American taxpayer. And the basic idea is to retain, or if you should wish to say this, regain Israel full sovereignty over Israel's decisions.
Yeah, there's an irony, I think, that everyone, there's an assumption, for good reason, that Israel would be concerned that the next president of the United States, certainly if he's from the Democrats, he or she would be hostile towards Israel, and therefore that would be a good reason why we would want to sort of weaken or disconnect somewhat from the United States. But actually, in many respects, it's Trump, who has been so supportive of Israel, that actually maybe has kind of pushed us in that way, because he's also, as part of his support, is imposing things on us which are causing us some problems. There's an irony there.
Yes, well, this kind of thing has a good name in English. It's called a bear hug.
Yes.
And when the bear hugs you, some of you, you some of your bones may not be in the same shape again, and frankly, to some extent, this is already happening. The CMCC is fantastic in some respects, but it is also an imposition of Israel's freedom of action in Gaza. And the manner in which Rising Lion was ended reflected Trump's notion that he can tell us what to do under the circumstances. It's a delicate matter. Previous American presidents, we said no to, and went to Congress and to the American people asking for their support, and sometimes it worked. It's much more difficult to imagine such a development under Trump.
There's a very sort of, I guess, kind of practical question here from Jacqueline, who asks she's asking whether Israel, in joining the Board of Peace, has to pay the $1 billion that apparently the countries are supposed to pay to be part of it. Is Israel also going to pay that? And she asks, who's going to monitor these funds to prevent fraud, etc.? Do you have an answer?
As I said, curious and curious. Nobody has the slightest idea. This is not the UN. This is a new creation. Whether it will function, whether it will really cost any money, or this is just a gesture, is very difficult to tell. Look, I would say most Israelis would welcome a reality in which the UN as an institution has lost its luster and is overshadowed by an alternative organization dominated by U.S. policy. But frankly, some of the people that have been asked to join are not going to be in any shape or form interested in relieving pressure on America. So I don't know. I don't know where this is headed. The numbers are growing by the day. Uh, it's a positive thing that we hear that Netanyahu has also been invited to be part of all of this. But how this is going to function, how is this going to resolve the questions mentioned, demilitarization, de-radicalization, new integration, all of this cannot be done under the present format.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a bit of an enigma. There's a question, simple question from Naomi Levy, admirably concise question. Egypt's stance on this. Well, where's Egypt on this?
Very good question. I think the first and foremost consideration for the Egyptians is to prevent something like the full-scale Gaza war from being reignited, because they still have this fear, and it's not an irrational fear, of a wave of hysterical Palestinian migration pouring into Sinai, turning into something else. Then it is now maybe reaching the heartland of Egypt. And we really must remember that Egypt is almost the entire time on the verge of economic collapse. They have a reason to want stability, and Israel can use this deep and abiding interest by asking the Egyptians to be more helpful on issues like blocking the Turks and the Qataris, which is a mutual interest, certainly for Sisi's government, which they try to destroy uh, in his day, back in when he took power. And so we have commonalities with the Egyptian position. But nevertheless, first of all, we cannot entirely trust the Egyptian establishment in Sinai. Whatever we feel like in a conversation with Sisi, that doesn't necessarily translate into actions on the ground.
Mm.
And we have to keep an eye on where the Egyptians are headed, because the Turks are very aggressively now courting the regime. That's the same regime that just 12 years ago they were still referring to as usurper, and essentially cutting off relations and trying to isolate Egypt. And today they see the merit of a relationship. So in itself, it may be positive that Egypt has gone with us to the gas deal. It's part of our Eastern Mediterranean structure, but it is also something that we need to monitor very carefully against Egypt away from Israel, away from its traditional conservative partners in the region, and over into Erdogan's orbit. It requires very close attention.
Mm. Jonathan asks whether, when you, at the end of your initial presentation, you talked about the possibility of Israel actually going back in, the IDF going back in to take out Hamas, and you said that it would be, although it would be difficult, it would be easier than before. Jonathan asked whether one of the reasons for that is that the hostage situation is no longer there.
No question about it. There's definitely the whole combat calculus, when you fear for the lives of Israelis in a tunnel underground, changes when this is no longer the situation. Hamas know it, and this is why they've been putting a lot of effort into using the intermediaries, Qatar and Egypt, to tell the Americans not to let us do anything of the kind. I'm not sure Israel should listen. We are not entirely an owned
right. Yes.
property.
We're not a vassal state, as the prime minister for whom my institution was named famously said.
Yes.
Eric Hastman asks whether given that we are moving into phase two of Trump's plan, at what point or under what conditions does is Israel supposed to return more territory to Gaza? That is, to withdraw from the yellow line.
Well, let's separate this into two different chunks. There is the perimeter, and there is the area between the perimeter and the yellow line. Presumably, once the ISF is in place and can take over from Israel the areas of Gaza currently under our control, and of course, if that ever happens, the areas that we will take from Hamas in the future, that ultimately is where the IDF does not want to stay, and in all likelihood will not stay if there is a serious ISF to replace it. International Stabilization Force. As for the immediate perimeter on Israel's border, the last few hundred yards from which the Palestinian terrorists emerged by the thousands and swept over, the perimeter must remain in Israeli hands for the unforeseeable future, for a very long time. And interestingly, it is written into the text of UN Security Council Resolution 2803 that the perimeter will remain in Israeli hands. It's an extremely unusual text for the UN to use as regards the territory of a former let's say, a territory that they recognized that occupied Palestinian territory. It was language that they regularly used, and now they recognize that Israel has a right to hold on to it until, let's put it like this, until Gaza is stabilized and elephants fly. So essentially, the perimeter is going to remain a fact of life for the immediate and intermediate future, at least.
One last quick question. Jonathan again. He asks, how worried are you about Turkish military presence in Gaza? You've already mentioned it was along the Red Sea, Turkish military presence along the Red Sea.
Well, clearly, we cannot entirely prevent the Turks from doing business with the Somali government and playing some kind of game in Sudan that gives them a grip. We have every reason to be concerned. Our answer to such designs is essentially the recognition of Somaliland and closer and closer cooperation with this small democracy in Africa, and other strategic positions in the outskirts of the Red Sea that will give us the ability to strike back at anyone who attacks us. And that's all that we need there.
Okay. I think that's all we have time for. Eran Lerman, thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time and enlightening us about an increasingly complicated, perhaps will get more complicated as the days go on, issue.
I'm afraid so. The main questions are all still ahead of us.
Right. Nevertheless, you provided us with some answers where there are answers, and you've at least helped us to think more about the questions that will emerge in the future. So I thank you very much for that. I thank everyone for joining us. Please join us again for the third webinar, which will be with Hillel Frisch about the Palestinian Authority. That's, I believe, on the 5th of February, and these will continue. So please keep an eye on our website and our Facebook page. If you're not on my mailing list, then you can do so by emailing me, paulg@begincentre.org.il, and then you'll hear in good time about all our events in English. Thank you all for joining. Thank you very much, Eran Lerman, and good evening, good afternoon to all of you. Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.